Hello, my name is Robin Donaldson, and I am the Chief Operations Officer with Indiana Youth Service Association. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the 2021 Indiana Youth Service Association Professional Development Retreat, Reconnecting with Your Inner Child. This retreat is not possible without your support and participation, and we hope that you are excited to hear from our presenters. Before we begin this presentation, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items and let you know that your certificate of attendance will be available only after the session is viewed in its entirety and the evaluation is completed. The evaluation will be available at the end of this presentation. And if you need CEUs, please email me directly at rdonaldson@indysb.org. A shareable version of all of the training materials will be made available to you once our conference is ended. And if you have any issues accessing this session or any of the materials, again, please email me at rdonaldson@indy, as in Sam, B as in boy.org. I'm very glad that you're joining me for my session, Body Memories of Trauma and How to Heal. For those of you who do not know me, I am like I said, the Chief Operations Officer at IYSA, and we are a member organization that provides training and support for youth service bureaus across the state. I'm also the founder and CEO of Collective Impact Training and Consulting, LCC. I've been in the youth service field for almost 30 years and spent 12 of those years at the Youth Service Bureau of Monroe County in Bloomington, Indiana. I have been teaching psychology classes for about 20 years at Ivy Tech Community College of Indiana. I have my master's degree in counseling and social psychology, and I'm currently a PhD candidate at Adler University in industrial and organizational psychology. I just finished my graduate certification in applied educational neuroscience at Butler University, and I am a former licensed mental health counselor as well as a foster parent. In addition to that, I'm the mother of 4 boys and I have 1 granddaughter. And with that, let's go ahead and start the presentation. So this is Body Memories of Trauma and How to Heal. And in this session, we are going to spend a very brief time reviewing definitions and looking at the ACE pyramid. I'm going to spend some time understanding the normal stress response system, so explaining that so that you understand the impact of trauma on brain development and the stress response, and then spend some time talking about coping strategies that we can use to reduce the adverse impact of stress and trauma. So to begin with, we are going to start, like I said, with definitions and talk about stress. And stress is a response that we make to any event or circumstance that threatens our ability to cope. So stress can be both positive, it's called eustress. And so examples of positive stress could be getting a promotion in a job. Moving is often, it's positive, but it can be stressful to move as well. Getting married, having a new child, all of these things are positive events that can tax our ability to cope and require some type of adjustment or response to that. And then there is adverse stress. So stress is going to have a negative impact. That's called distress. Understanding that it can be both positive and negative, I think is a really good point, because we can actually use sometimes this to our advantage to learn new coping skills, to be able to adapt and change behavior in positive ways. So trauma, this is the definition that is found in the American Psychological Association Diagnostic Statistical Manual version 5. And what I like about this definition is it talks about being exposed to death, exposed to and experiencing a serious injury or sexual violence, but also the perception, so threatened death, threatened injury, or threatened physical violence. Because what sexual violence, because what this does, the word threatened includes the idea that it is very individualized, that perception plays a very large part and whether or not someone is going to view a situation that requires a response as either positive or negative. And that's why we get a lot of times some very individualized behaviors when it comes to a situation that is a stressful situation. And some people respond positively, and some and are able to move through and actually even grow, psychologically, emotionally through that challenging experience. And for some folks, it is distressing, and they are not able to move in that, and they get stuck in it, and it actually gets in the way of continued functioning. So this definition does include that kind of personalized part of stress. When we think about trauma, trauma can happen so directly, so something that happens to us. So that would be when we are the victim of a physical attack, when we are the victim of let's say, being in a car accident that causes an injury. If we are sexually assaulted, it happens to us. That's that direct piece. But it's also stressful, and we can experience trauma when we witness that happen in person, that happening to someone else. So if we think about the children that we work with who actually witness domestic violence in the home, that is a very common witnessing this type of trauma that they would experience. We can also experience trauma indirectly when we learn that someone that we love is exposed to a trauma, that someone has been hurt, that something bad has happened to someone that we love. That also can trigger a trauma response in us, as well as this last bullet, which is repeated or extreme indirect exposure, which initially was added because of first responders understanding that firefighters, first responders, law enforcement officers are often called to a situation that there is a very traumatic event. So injury to someone else, they don't know them, they're strangers, but it's injury over and over again, injuries to someone else, death sometimes even, these very difficult positions, and being exposed to that over a period of time does have an impact on you witnessing that. It's called secondary trauma. And we as healthcare providers or social service providers also can experience this type of secondary trauma when we listen to and hear the stories about the traumatic things that happen to the kids and the families that we work with. There are other diagnostic criteria. So within the DSM, trauma was added as a diagnosis. And so diagnostic criteria include intrusive symptoms. So actually re-experiencing that, it's different than memory, because it's intrusive means that it's out of our control, and we can't just turn it off. There tends to be avoidance for all of those things that are associated with the trauma. Very often you see a negative change in mood and in the thought processes of individuals who've experienced trauma, in addition to alterations in their physical reaction, so their arousals or how they physically react to things. So I think it's good to understand that the stress response within our body has developed in order for us to survive. It is a very positive, adaptive response that occurs so that we can get through a difficult, potentially dangerous, challenging, or threatening situation and allow us to move on. But our physiological stress response is really meant for what we call acute stress, things that have a very clear beginning and a very clear end. And what happens, especially when we're talking about children and families that deal with chronic stress, stress that doesn't go away due to some of the things that we've already talked about: physical violence, sexual violence, domestic violence, but it also can be a chronic stress due to being economically deprived, living in poverty, living in a neighborhood that is unsafe. Maybe the family is safe, but the neighborhood itself is unsafe, and you're constantly exposed to violence. Those all, intergenerational and systemic racism also can be chronic trauma that people have to deal with over and over again. And that's where our bodies get in trouble, because our bodies were not meant for this stress response to occur with chronic trauma. Only that acute trauma, clear beginning, clear end, so that we can return to a resting state. So this is called the general adaptation syndrome. It is our stress response. And whether this is, estrus or distress, so good or bad, positive stress, we enter this alarm phase. Something happens and our brain understands that we need to respond in some way. There's some type of response that's needed for us to be able to get through this challenging situation. And so when that message comes in, our stress response is triggered. It's activated by different parts of the brain. There is a release of cortisol. There's a release of adrenaline so that we can deal with the situation. And we deal with the situation. If it is acute, then we can be done with it, and we can kind of return to that resting state. If it is something that's going on for a long period of time, what happens is we continue to maintain that level, and then we'll talk about what the physiological changes are, but we'll maintain those physiological changes to continue to meet that stressful situation, that threatening situation. This is called the phase of resistance, where we can just it's a holding pattern of being on high alert, of high blood pressure and high heart rate, and high, breathing patterns, because we need that additional energy to deal with the continued things that are going on. This can only be maintained for a certain period of time. And if we are talking about chronic trauma, then at some point we will tap out our resources and we will enter this phase of exhaustion. And the next thing that is going to be taxing to us, it might be exposure to the common cold virus. But it could be someone getting, we're not able to get our work in at the deadline. Maybe we don't have resources that we need, but something that normally wouldn't cause an extreme reaction, because we have maintained this high level, is going to cause this kind of decline with the phase of exhaustion, where we just simply have depleted our resources, and our body and our brain kind of crashes, because we need to rest in order to kind of rejuvenate, to recharge, if you will, because we've been on go for so long. Typically what will happen is that we will get sick. So we're going, and this, something comes along, a virus, a bacteria, and we get it, and it knocks us on our backs, because we are done. There's nothing left to fight it. And what could have been, normally would last, if it's a common cold, last a day or two, now we're out a week, because we don't have the resources to fight that. And so this is kind of this chronic trauma and this extended demand on our body to meet that stress is where we're going to really kind of run into the damage, this phase of exhaustion, and potentially chronic damage. And we're going to talk about what those are. So when this alarm phase is activated, when we are first faced with something that is stressful, something that is going to demand some type of change in our response, and in our behaviors, the body changes. And so we actually see an increase in cholesterol, which we know is bad for us, but an increase in cholesterol and fatty acids in the blood, because this is energy that is used over a long period of time. We are going to see an increase in blood pressure. We're going to see an increase in heart rate and in respiration and breathing, because again, that's going to bring oxygen levels. While we're seeing an increase in things like blood pressure, heart rate, and breathing, what we're going to see is a decrease in all our digestive system. So the things that aren't necessary, immediately to meet that response or that threat, are going to kind of shut down. We see a decrease. So the digestive system decrease often leads to that, kind of cotton mouth, because there's a decrease in saliva. We have a decrease in our immune and our allergic response systems, because again, we're meeting an immediate threat. And so it shuts down those processes. We may see if there's an injury, localized inflammation, so swelling that will occur. So if you bang your knee, that's an injury. You'll see kind of that swelling that happens there. If it is emotional or social stress, we also now know that there is inflammation that occurs in the brain that is kind of fairly new neuroscience information about a response to stress. Faster blood clotting, which is good, because if we're injured, we want the blood to clot so we don't bleed to death. We'll see an increase again in the production of blood sugars for energy, and we know over a long period of time that's bad for us, and an increase in stomach acid. All of these things work well initially to help us deal with the threat, but over a long period of time, we know high cholesterol, fatty acids, increase in stomach acids, high blood sugar, all of these can damage our bodies if they are maintained over a long period of time. I mentioned that the stress hormone cortisol is released, it works very, very well with acute stress. It helps focus our attention. It helps us pay attention to what's going on in our surroundings that may have caused that threat, so that we can recognize that in the future and remove ourselves from those situations. But over a long period of time, cortisol is bad for the neurons and for our brain cells. So to kind of understand this connection between what's going on in the brain and how that is connected to our body and all of these things that we've talked about, digestion, breathing, heart rate, you have to understand that there is a nerve system. It's called the vagal nerve that actually runs. So this is the vagal nerve that actually runs along from the brain to the rest of the body. It connects the brain to pretty much everything in our bodies. So when we are in a stressful situation, we will see that during stress, our pupils are dilated so that we can get more information in. I talked about the inhibition of saliva, the increase in heart rate, decreasing all of the secretions in our, except for stomach acid, that increases in our digestive system, and the glucose, all of these types of things that it inhibits bladder contraction during a time of stress, because that is when the sympathetic nervous system is activated. And the sympathetic nervous system is there so that we can respond to a stressful situation. It is what initiates that fight or flight system so that we can meet a challenge, deal with it, run away from it, it's gone. And then what should happen, if it is an acute stress, there's an end to it, is that we then will move over and change to the parasympathetic nervous system. So the parasympathetic nervous system, so this kind of another part of the vagal nerve, is what's responsible when we are safe, when we are just kind of running on automatic. It's called the autonomic nervous system, where everything just happens unconsciously. We don't have to think about it. We don't have to think about digesting our food. We really don't have to think about breathing and returning to our normal heart rate. It happens naturally. And this is where we conserve energy. This is going to be where we can be really engaged when the parasympathetic nervous system is in charge. This is where we are our best selves, where we can think and we can connect with individuals outside of a stressful situation. So we're able to learn and we're able to grow with the parasympathetic nervous system activated. Sympathetic nervous system is all about survival. Parasympathetic nervous system is returning to normal, conserving energy, and helping us be able to learn. So understanding that vagal nerve is what connects the brain and our stress response system to our bodies it's really important to look at our autonomic nervous system that activates, so autonomic nervous system is parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, and figure out when we're working with kids, when we are looking at our own behaviors, we can look at this and figure out which one of those vagal nerve systems are in response. Are we safe? Because if we're safe, then this is where we have the optimal arousal levels. This is where we can really, it's called the ventral vagal. It just has to do with front and back, where we can connect with one another because we have eye contact, because we're able to use our facial expressions to communicate to another person, read their facial expressions to understand that, to vocalize, to use our words. But we have to be in this parasympathetic safe place to be able to do that. We're resting, we're digesting, we're at kind of our optimal level of arousal. When the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, then we have this increase of heart rate, we have the fight or flight system, and we're going to look, and behavior is going to look different because now we're about meeting the threat. When things become very, very difficult, we have another part of the vagal nerve system that's going to really just shut everything down. And I think maybe another way to look at, I've got another slide, we'll come back to this when we talk about the stress response and learned stress response. But this overwhelming stress is going to actually decrease our responses so that we become hyper aroused. We have a decreased heart rate. We actually will, we have decreased experiences of pain. This is about surviving. And this is where so sympathetic nervous system, danger, fight, flight comes in. If it's overwhelming, life-threatening, this is our freeze response. And we will come back to this. So I think it's, we have to understand that very often we are dealing with kids who come from generational, a generational A cycle, adverse childhood experiences. It was there for grandma, it was there for mom, it is there for them. And not only is it the ACEs that the child experiences directly that can impact all of this development, all of how the brain is structuring and wiring itself, but also how the body is and the genetic expression is occurring. So this is called epigenetics, right? The fact that something that happens in our environment actually changes the way our genes are expressed. And this can be due to things that we inherit. And so this is a great example. So this slide specifically is around smoking, and not only is it affecting the mother because obviously she's going to be at increased risk of lung disease because she's smoking, but it's also going to affect her baby if she smokes while she is pregnant. Not only does it affect the baby, and what we see if you look at this for research over a period of time is an increase vulnerability to obesity and being overweight. So you see the change in her daughter, and the daughter's not smoking. But look, even so, the granddaughter is at a greater risk for obesity and being overweight based upon what happened with grandma. So this is a great example of epigenetics. This happens with stress as well. And one of the things, some really interesting research around survivors of the Holocaust was looking at the anxiety and depression levels, not of them, but of their children, because there was that genetic change that they passed along. The world was not safe for them. And from a genetic point of view, that information, that genetic coding was passed along to their offspring, who experienced higher levels of depression and anxiety based upon what happened to their parents. So we if there's stress during pregnancy, there is a lot of research that shows that that ties to an increase in, anxiety, mood disorders, sometimes attention disorders. There's that, it happened, so it doesn't have to happen to you directly. From a genetic point of view, we can inherit these types of vulnerabilities based upon what happened even just 2 generations back. So how, other than genetics, how does the stress response form? And what we know is that the brain develops in very, very specific ways. Babies, newborns are born into this world without the ability to calm themselves. That is where primary caregivers come in. It doesn't have to be a parent. It can be someone that is going to consistently care for this child, but there has to be at least one person in this child's life who is appropriately responsive to that, especially in the first year. So the first year, a lot of the brain development that happens in the left hemisphere and happens specifically around how we are going to respond and be able to deal with stress. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. What is critical at this age, and especially in the ability to manage stress, is attachment. So the ability to bond to an individual, to be able to feel loved, to feel cared for, to have an appropriate response. If they're hungry, the baby's fed. If they're wet, the baby is changed. If they're tired, they're rocked to sleep. All of these types of things, it's that social a social and emotional connection, not just meeting the child's physical needs, but meeting their emotional needs and their social needs. And we see that a lot of times if you look at a very healthy, mother-child bonding. The mother will look at the child. There's eye contact, especially during feeding. There's a social exchange. The mother will say something, they wait, the baby coos or makes a facial expression and responds, but that's that give and take that's so, so important, that they know that they have an important place in the world, that someone is there for them. And so attachment is critical, as well as that kind of really early life in terms of the brain being able to be wired for an appropriate and healthy stress response. And we see this, in ACEs. This has lifelong impacts, because we know that if there are these adverse childhood experiences, then it's going to disrupt neurodevelopment. That the brain actually is going to be wired differently if kids experience adverse childhood experiences. If something is going on, and it can be abuse, and it can be physical, emotional, or sexual abuse. It can be neglect. So neglect can also be physical and emotional neglect, or it could be some of these other dysfunctional or disruptive household environments, like domestic violence, an incarcerated parent, someone who has substance abuse within the house, parents who are separated or divorced, and I said domestic violence, I'm missing something, there's 10 of them. But if there's a large number of these things going on in the household, then we're going to see a real change in how the brain is developing. And that change is going to show up as social, emotional, and cognitive impairments. This is typically where we recognize it. And if we don't intervene and help them learn coping and resilient strategies, then they are going to most likely adopt health risk behaviors, such as smoking, such as the use of alcohol and other substances, maybe unhealthy sexual relationships, getting themselves into domestic violence relationships, using violence as a means of coping, all of which then put them at increased risk of developing other diseases, disabilities, or social problems like incarceration. to the point that someone who has an ACE score of 6 or more is likely to die 20 years earlier than someone who has an ACE score of 0. This is this is based upon the early ACE research that was done by Dr. Anda and Dr. Folletti. It is what they call dose response, which means that the more ACEs you have, the more likely you're going to be at risk for these types of things. And we do see an increase in the correlations between the number of ACEs and all of these later health outcomes. It has a real change, a real impact on the body and what is going on. So I mentioned that there's also a change in the stress response. The healthy stress response is this one down here. All right. And if you watch the Healing Through Sensory Grounding, I talked about this in that session as well. So a healthy stress response is based upon early childhood care. A baby gets upset, the parent comes, they meet that need appropriately, and we're being wired for this response down here. I'm happy, everything's good, I'm safe, something bad happens, and I'm going to be kicked up into the sympathetic nervous system, but it goes away and I come back down here. It is actually better for us to experience some adversity with supports in place so that we learn how to develop healthy coping mechanisms. We have better health outcomes if we experience some adverse experiences, but we know how to cope with them, not always down here. If we have no adverse experiences, these folks actually have lower health outcomes than if we have this healthy response system down here. We want to live here mostly. This is, like I said, this is the ventral vagal, the parasympathetic nervous system, where we are digesting, where our immune response is active. We are resistant to infection. We are resting. We have the ability to recuperate and heal. We are re-energizing, resetting neurotransmitter levels. Our circulation is good. We're not overtaxing our circulation system. Our digestive system is working. All of these things are working just kind of normally, automatically, without any increased stress. When we are in this like ventral vagal, this parasympathetic response where everything is safe and everything is good, we can be curious. We can learn, we can be compassionate and show empathy to other people. We can experience joy and really be able to absorb information from our environment and grow and learn. When the stress response is triggered, we jump up here to the sympathetic nervous system. All of those things that I talked about before are going to happen: increased blood pressure, blood rate, breathing, a decrease in our immune response system. So the immune response is kind of turned off, a decrease in fuel storage because we really need to be able to use that to respond to what's going on. And we will either take off running. And so you'll be able to recognize your kids who have this or who are predisposed to flight, which that will show up as panic, fear, anxiety, worry. Or the kids who are kind of predisposed to fight in their sympathetic nervous system response are going to respond with anger and rage and irritation and frustration. But this is all a movement toward the act, to something. So, well, fight is a movement toward, flight is a movement away. But all of this is an I can response. I can do something to get away from that. The last kind of response is when I talked about the dorsal vagal, so the other, so ventral's front and back, that's kind of what those mean. But when we talk about this dorsal vagal, it is when we feel completely overwhelmed. And this is when the freeze response is going to be activated. And this can happen one of two ways. It can happen when we experience multiple small stressors. They build, they build. We never have a chance to go back down here because one stress happens, and before we can respond, another one happens. And before we can respond, another one happens. And it builds and builds and builds to the point that the next small stressor is going to send us into this freeze response. The other way that this can happen is if we experience an overwhelming traumatic experience, an overwhelm, so a car injury where we are, a car accident where we're really, injured to the point that it's life-threatening. Could be a sexual assault. It could be a physical assault where we can't get away and there's lots of damage being done. Anything that feels just completely overwhelming and is life-threatening or feels life-threatening, and that's an important part, means that it's going to kind of kick us into this freeze response where our body just kind of, everything just turns off. The brain shuts everything down and we become immobile. So we lose, so if you can, I don't know if you guys can see this here, but we're going to increase fuel storage. Endorphins are going to kick in because endorphins mute pain. And so we'll have a decrease in our sense of pain. We also have a decrease in emotional responses where we just are not feeling, almost it's like we're numb. You see that over here, we're numb. We can disassociate where it feels like it's not happening to us. We also have a decrease in heart rate and blood pressure, temperature. We also have a decrease in muscle tone, meaning we lose the ability, we physically lose the ability to run away. We physically lose the ability to fight because at this point, the brain is all about surviving the incident. It is, let's conserve everything because we need to live to the next day. So we're not going to expend energy trying to run away or to fight because it's not going to do any good. So instead, we're going to shut everything down and we're just going to wait for it to be over so that we can move on. Eye contact goes away, facial expressions go away. They kind of have this flat affect. If you're looking at a child in this situation, that kind of goes away. They lose the ability to engage in social behavior. They lose the ability to engage in verbal behavior because they're just conserving. It's almost like they just kind of go offline because it's all about surviving. It's important when you are working with kids or families and you have this, you've noticed this freeze response with them, for them to understand this as well, for parents to understand it. If, let's say, their child has experienced something that has triggered this freeze response, that they're not asking questions like, and we're not asking questions like, why didn't you run away? Why didn't you tell anyone? Why didn't you fight? Because they cannot do that. Physically, the brain has shut that ability down. And when we ask those questions, or even if we don't ask those questions, they're thinking the same thing. Why didn't I fight? I should have run away. If they know that the brain has turned off their ability to do those things, they will not feel the shame and blame that is very often associated with this stage. This is not something that we really understand, from a general public point of view. So helping them understand that this is a natural stress response that occurs in these overwhelming situations, or even in small situations when we have this buildup of all of these smaller stressors, is nothing's wrong with them. It's just the body's way of kind of conserving energy and being able to get through that next step. When you have kids who live in chronic, traumatic, abusive, excuse me, or dysfunctional homes, and this is what it looks like all of the time, what ends up happening is the stress response gets reset. So instead of down here, this is where they live. They're hardly ever in this social engagement ventral vagal stage and parasympathetic nervous system, because their environment is constantly bombarding them with threats. So they're living in the sympathetic nervous system with this fight or flight and this high level of stress, high level of cortisol, high level of blood pressure, heart rates, those types of things. And when a small thing happens, it bumps them into this freeze response. So these kids are either worried or angry all the time, and then they shut down, based upon what's going on, but they're never able to achieve this level down here because their environment doesn't let them. And in situations, so, as I said, this stuff is, the stress response is learned. It is set based upon wiring that occurs in the brain very, very early in life. So in that situation, even if they're in a safe situation, they're not going to be able to recognize that because the world has been dangerous for them and it will continue to be dangerous. They're reading things differently. They're reading behaviors differently based upon this early wiring. So we look at this in terms of what's going on in the brain and the activity in the brain. You can see that in a stressful situation, the part of the brain that is most active is the brainstem. And this is our survival brain. This is the part of the brain that's all about keeping us safe and all about making sure that we survive. That's the part of the brain that's most active during the stress response system, followed very closely by the limbic system and midbrain. Midbrain is about coordinating movement. Limbic system is about our emotional response. That's 30%. The part of the brain that is responsible for thinking, kind of that thinking brain, the thinking response, logic, and activity, it's only 10% active during a stress response. So when our kids, when our families, and we're working, when we are extremely stressed out, when we are in crisis mode, verbal communication, logical communication, trying to appeal to them rationally is not going to work because that part of the brain is not very active. It has it's shut down, and the part that's really going to be taking over is this part that's all about survival. So I talk about speaking to these different parts of the brain, the survival brain, the emotional brain, and the thinking brain. In the other session that I'm doing, the healing through sensory grounding, and giving kind of some suggestions for how to speak to those parts of the brain. We'll do a little bit of that in this session as well. But I just want to let you know that that additional information is there. All right. So one of the other things that happens when people grow up in a stressful, chaotic, high ACE environment is that the brain is rewired differently. And one of the things that's noticed that is different is called this default mode network. So there is a network in our brain that really connects all of the parts of the brain to each other. And that's really important, this integration between the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, between the limbic system, which is the emotional part of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex, which is the thinking part of the brain. And that speaking to the survival part of the brain, because sometimes our prefrontal cortex can say, wait a minute, you don't need to be so upset. And then it shuts down the emotions that we're feeling that's causing our increased heart rate and our increased blood pressure. So that communication, that integration is really, really important to kind of return us to normal, to help us respond appropriately. All of that's based upon experience. And if we don't have that experience, then a lot of times this integration, the ability for the brain to communicate, all the brain structures to talk to one another, to connect, to integrate a positive, appropriate response is not in place. And you really see a change and a decrease in the level of brain activity, especially the connections between the brain structures when people have grown up in this ACE high, traumatic or dysfunctional environment. What ends up happening is that our environment hardwires us to experience the world in a certain way. So when kids grow up in a dysfunctional, abusive home, then the brain is going to be prepared for trauma. They experience trauma. It increases the toxic stress, the increase of cortisol that's going on. It changes the way the brain is wired so that there's much more activity in that survival part of the brain. That's going to, remember the upside down kind of pyramid that I showed you. So the thinking part of the brain is less active. The part of the brain responsible for keeping us alive, responding to stress, is going to be more active. Things look more dangerous, and we're really focused on this fight, flight, or freeze response. And this is going to continue even in environments that are safe, but they're not able to recognize that it's a safe environment because that has not been their experience. And I will say that, and when an adult becomes angry, when we become stressed, when we are dysregulated, that is a trigger. It is a stress response trigger for children who have come from this traumatic background. So stress response trigger anyway for most of us, but it's especially a trigger for someone who's come from a traumatic background, because sometimes that means that you get hurt. If the adult is angry, sometimes that means that you get hurt and you either have to fight back or you have to take off or you completely shut down because there's nothing that you can do about it. So, it is an adaptive response because it has kept them alive to this point, but it doesn't always work in new situations where there may not be those, those kind of dangers in place. When we are wired for this connection in a very nurturing, relational type of response, this is the appropriate consistent caregiver. At this point, the brain is wired for that connection. It is looking for, it will look to and trust other people to help them dysregulate, and to kind of calm back down. They're able to look for that type of support. And it really, and they're going to be, it's going to be easier for these kids to make those connections to prefrontal cortex, to kind of calm back down. The downside of this is that for these kids, they may be especially vulnerable when the situation is dangerous. They don't recognize those signs, and so they will be more vulnerable as opposed to the kids who recognize those signs and are able to get themselves out of that. So looking at this in terms of they're just wired to look at the world differently. These kids see the world as safe. They see adults as trustworthy, as protection, as sources for support and connection and safety. And up here, these kids see adults oftentimes as that source of stress, as that source of pain, and injury. And the world just looks different for them. It's not going to be as easy for them to navigate, and recognize safe situations. So in addition to the changes that occur in the brain, this has there are very specific changes that occur in our body, and these connections. So we are keeping, if you look again at the original ACE study, and we see that the number of ACEs go up, the number of the risk of cancer goes up. If you have high ACEs, you are at increased risk of heart disease, you're at increased risk of respiratory illnesses, you're at increased risk for autoimmune disorders. It is a very physical impact that goes on. So when we look at an increase, and it makes sense if, understanding this, if you live in that world of sympathetic nervous system, constant fight or flight, where blood pressure is always up, heart rate's always up, breathing is always up, it taxes that cardiovascular system. It wears it out faster because it's constantly stressed. It's going to be more vulnerable to outside risks and outside kind of toxins and contaminants because it's constantly stressed. And so something that comes in that is a toxin or a risk is going to have a greater impact than if it's a system that is not stressed out so much. So this is a lot of times why we see that increase in heart disease at an earlier age for people who have suffered from a high ACE kind of environment. Now, there's a lot of those things going on. They are going to be at increased risk for that. If you are stressed, and this is true for both, I think both positive and even, as well as adverse stress, negative stress, we're ready to meet the demands. So I'm doing this webinar and I have this recording and I have some type of, responsibility to meet. And so I'm on, blood pressure's going, I'm cortisol, paying attention to what's going on. But I'm also can feel the tension because I'm ready to kind of, even though there's no physical response that's required of me, when I activate that stress response to meet the need, to meet the challenge of completing a task, whatever it is, whether it's a social task, whether it's a cognitive task, or if it's a physical task, my body gets ready for this. So it's fascinating research that looks at why we get ready, why we experience muscle tension. If I have, and I know just based upon looking at patterns of behavior when I'm stressed, that my go-to is fight. I mentioned that I'm the mother of boys. And when they were teenagers, they thought it was absolutely hilarious to jump out and scare me. I didn't run. My initial response was not to run. My initial response, without even thinking, I'm not even thinking about it, immediate response is this, to strike out. So that's my fight. That's my fight response. Coming, get away from me, pushing someone away, making sure that they're not getting close enough to do me damage. And so when I am in that situation, it is my back, my shoulders, and my upper arm. These are the muscles that are really activated because my response is going to be this. And I need those muscles to be able to do that. For people who are more prone to the flight response and activation of the sympathetic nervous system, they may feel it in their lower back. Because again, when stress response is initiated, the muscles in your lower back, your buttocks, and your thighs are activated so that we can run away. And unless we're releasing that tension somehow, we're going to hold it there. And over a long period of time, it's going to have some negative impacts. It's just, we get sore. We're not able to move around as much. We lose flexibility. In some cases, it can cause additional trouble, but that's because our sympathetic nervous system, that response to something that demands our attention, is activating that stress response, and those muscles are activated so that we're able to kind of do this. We do see an increase in asthma for kids who have high ACE scores, but not only for kids who have ACE scores, but there's also research that shows that this is one of those epigenetic impacts that occur. So if mom was stressed, if grandma, is stressed, these things are passed along not only to the immediate generation afterwards, but so daughter, son is impacted, but so are grandchildren. And a lot of times that connection is through an experience of asthma. So asthma and other respiratory vulnerabilities, diseases increase based upon not only genetics, so epigenetic influences, but also just, again, those sometimes unhealthy responses that we make. Asthma is related to secondhand smoke. And so if parents are stressed and they're smoking more, then that puts their child at risk for asthma. So we see this kind of increase lots of different ways, but certainly the respiratory system is going to be impacted. We also see a high, so there's a lot of this is correlational, which means that as one goes up, the other goes up, or, it depends on whether that's a positive correlation, but there's a relationship. Correlational research doesn't necessarily mean that one thing causes the other. There could be something else, but it definitely indicates that there's a relationship. And so there's correlational research that shows that, again, ACE scores, early trauma is linked to later digestive issues. And so you have a lot of people who will experience Crohn's disease, and just, maybe irritable bowel syndrome, lots of correlation between irritable bowel syndrome and early trauma. And this impacts that. Now, remember that vagal nerve is running all the way down our body, and it's connecting to all of these different internal organs, and it's having an impact when our stress response is activated. Finally, there is a large body of research that shows that adverse childhood experiences are significantly linked to autoimmune disorders. And what's interesting about this research is that it seems to be more linked to emotional abuse and neglect than physical abuse and neglect. Emotional abuse and neglect seem to have an increase in adverse experiences. It's not something that it was like when I first read that research, I think most of us assume that sexual abuse is going to have the most negative impact on functioning. And that tends not to be the case if we look just at the research and that relation to later health impacts. So, that's where the emotional abuse and neglect do have a more negative impact on the body, especially as it relates to autoimmune disorders. And if we think about it, I think that kind of makes sense, because if someone is being physically abused or sexually abused, that doesn't necessarily mean that there isn't someone else who is who's responsive to them and meeting that emotional need for them. So, but if you are being emotionally abused or emotionally neglected, that means that there is an absence of that buffer, of that protective factor that someone else can give. And relationships and a positive caring adult can buffer or lessen the negative impacts of other types of adults. That disappears with emotional abuse because there isn't that buffer. So, not only is the abuse itself impactful, but we've lost that, that thing that can help protect us, that positive caring adult that can help protect us for that and makes us more vulnerable to the negative impacts. All right. So giving you a lot of information that's kind of, it's like, oh my gosh, this is horrible. I'm sure you guys are thinking this is my ACE score and, or this is the ACE score of the kids I'm working with and it's all really high. And what do we do? But this is just it's not the end of the presentation. And Dr. Anda, who was one of the original investigators of the ACE study, likes to say that ACEs are not destiny. Just because you have an high ACE score doesn't mean that all of this stuff is going to happen. It just means that there are risks that it will happen and increases your vulnerability. But there are also a lot of other protective factors that can be put into place that can buffer or negate or reduce that negative impact. And I've done this training a lot in the social service field. Our numbers, our ACE score numbers tend to be higher than the original study that was done and the general population, but we also tend to have higher protective factors. So if we think about, the difficult things that we've gone through, but there was always that one person, or sometimes there were, if we're really lucky, 2 or 3 people that we could always go to, that kind of negated and lessen that negative impact. So it's important to understand this because we know that if it's predictable, and we know ACEs and the tie to those other health outcomes is predictable, that means that it's preventable. And all of this is really helpful and almost, we can have an optimistic view because resilience is learned. It is something that we can learn at any age. It may take us longer. We may, if we wait until we're 20, then it's going to take us longer to learn things and to kind of get over those negative impacts. But if we start young, then we can kind of negate a lot of, and really prevent a lot of those health risks and the rest of that pyramid from happening. All right. And all this happens because the brain, there's neuroplasticity. The brain has this wonderful adaptive ability. As long as we are alive, the brain has the ability to change and to adapt to our environment. So this is where we come in. This is the really, really good news. This is the second part of the session. We've talked about the impact of trauma on the body and how that really changes our physiological and neurological responses. But there are certain things that we can do to help heal from those. So we're going to talk about, and this is where you can help introduce these things to the kids and families that you're working with. Looking at coping strategies. And there are 2 different ways to approach a problem, a problem or a stressful situation, a stressor. One is problem focused, and this is where we simply eliminate the source of stress. We get rid of it. We don't have to deal with it anymore. It goes away. That's hard. A lot of times those are hard to do. Maybe it's a bad boss or irritating coworker and you get a new job. That would be an example of a problem focused. If we're talking about kids, especially kids who come from abusive homes, and then moving them out of that abusive home and away from the abuser might be problem focused. There's still some other things that have to be in place. Sometimes it hasn't reached the level that they can be removed from home, but there's still a lot of chaos. We can't make that problem go away. So then we turn to emotion focused. And this, instead of changing or getting rid of the stress, we are changing our reaction to it. We're controlling how we respond to that. That's never going to go away, but I can change how I feel about it through some of these other strategies. So we're going to go through really focusing on the emotion focused strategies. If you can get rid of the problem, everything's good to go. Most of the time, we're not in that situation. So we're going to focus on these emotion strategies, emotion focused strategies. I want to mention cognitive strategies. A lot of times these can be done in formal therapy, but we also can do these without formal. So these are all kind of informal ways to change the way that we think about things. And distraction is one of those ways. If we can't, and you'll see this with kids who will go, find books, go watch TV, they just distract themselves from the situation. What's interesting is that there's research that says that men in general are able to distract themselves better than females. And that's why females tend to be more negatively impacted by stress, why we have higher levels of anxiety, why we have higher levels of depression, because we can't distract. In general, females don't distract. They think about it. We get caught up in it, and it has a negative kind of, it's going to kind of get caught in that spiral where just, we stew in it, and it just has more and more negative impact. where men are able to kind of, generally speaking, separate themselves out. Now, there's certainly exceptions to this. This is overall. Most of the things that I've talked about is talking about, overall, this is how it impacts. There are always individual differences. I myself am a master distractor. Really good at being able to do that and remove my, kind of just like, okay, I'm not going to think about this negative. There's nothing I can do about it. I'm going to go do something that makes me feel better. And I'm really, really good at that. I have a son who's supposed to be good at this, and he's not. He will ruminate. He will sit and think about it unless he makes a really, really conscious effort to do something different. And so there are those individual differences. We also can make ourselves feel better about a bad situation when we make a comparison to someone else who's in a situation that's worse than ours. So, it was, at least I don't have this to deal with. At least I don't. So it's kind of just, it's like, yeah, maybe I'm stressed and maybe my, boss is giving me a hard time or whatever, but at least I'm not in a physically abusive relationship, or at least I have social support. So, making those comparisons can make us feel better. It makes it easier for us to deal with what's going on when we know that there are other people who are worse off and who have it worse than we do. We can also just kind of generally reevaluate. So this is kind of that big picture thinking. So if something's really, really bugging me, and and I can think, okay, so in the large scheme of things, how important is this? I am not a fan of driving. I do a lot of driving for my work. I'm not a fan of driving. I want to be where I want to go as soon as I get in my car. People who are slow or cut me off or whatever really, really aggravate me. And I have to consciously, remind myself that this is not a big deal. It's not going to be the end of the world if I get to wherever I'm going 5 minutes later than what I originally planned. Now, it's not the end of the world. I can deal with that. It's better than, so again, the comparison, it's better than going fast and getting into a wreck. And so, my strategy is always like, okay, so this person is slow in front of me because if I had the ability to go fast, I'd get in a wreck. So they're keeping me safe. And that's that, just kind of thinking about it just a little bit differently will reduce the amount of stress that I feel. If I can't do that, then I will distract myself. I put music on. So there are lots of different ways that we can kind of do this, but these are all cognitive strategies. I wanted to kind of throw those out. We're going to spend more time on some other types of strategies, but I did want to throw these out because how we think about something has a very, very direct impact on how we will deal with it. And this is one of the reasons why two people can be in the same situation but have completely different reactions to it. So you start a new class, and for some people, everyone's going to experience some stress because it requires new changes. But for some people, that's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be exciting because we get to learn something new. And for other people, it's going to be, oh my God, I'm not sure I can do this. I've got all this other stuff going on, and it's going to cause a negative reaction. So these cognitive strategies really show how if we think about things just a little bit differently, it can change our emotional response and our emotional reaction to it, and really just shut down that stress response system and allow us to return to that, kind of parasympathetic, just really safe, calm place to be. We do have physical strategies, so active strategies where we're actually doing something. And so for a lot of people, exercise, aerobic exercise is a really effective way of dealing with stress. It is a way to release that physical energy that we're holding into our body. We do this, we hold, and we know this, right? We hold that physical energy because the way that our world has evolved, we no longer have those physical expressions. We're really not fighting. Most of the time when we're dealing with stress, it's not anything that requires a physical fight. or a chance to run away, like physically run away with it. And so, but our bodies haven't kind of caught up yet. We're still having that kind of physical reaction, and we're never letting our bodies know that it's okay to let go of that energy. And that's one of the things that these active strategies do, is they let the body know, hey, it's okay. I mean, it is the advantage of a deep breath. Have you ever noticed like something's really stressful and when finally it's over and we do that? That's a signal to our brain and to our body that this is over. It's okay. We can return to kind of parasympathetic nervous system, re-energize, reset everything, and it's all right. When we are not doing that physical, so the deep breathing thing, the big sigh kind of thing, aerobic exercise will do that. Walking will do that. If you're doing any of these things, you're using your body. Walking is going to be especially helpful if you have that tension in your lower back. We can also do specific targeted tension release exercises. So if, as I said, I hold my tension up here. If you're one of those people who hold your tension in your neck and your shoulders, a targeted tension release exercise would be to press your palms together, and you press them as hard as you can. And eventually, I'm not doing this on purpose, but that pressure causes my hands to shake. I'm actually using the muscles in my arms, shoulders, and neck. And it's shaking, it's releasing that tension, and I let go, and all of a sudden I feel better here. If you hold in your lower back, there's some targeted tension release exercise to do that as well. You can look this stuff up online. There's a lot of stuff that will kind of walk you through some of these things. You can actually go to people who are trained to teach you tension release exercises. If you have, a lot of times that's going to be helpful if it has been a really, really traumatic experience, or if you have this life, this history of abuse and neglect, where you have to kind of be guided through these types of things. But, just for simple stuff, you can look some of this stuff up online. Another active strategy is tapping, and that's what the picture is on this page. And so tapping a lot of times is you start through prime. So it accompanies a cognitive, a verbal thing that you say in your head. So it might be something that causes, you say the irritant or something that causes your stress. You follow that up with what you can do, a helpful strategy that you can do. And you prime yourself. So you do a kind of like a karate chop on your hand, and then you tap this fatty part of your hand while you say that saying 3 times. So I get really stressed when people interrupt me, but I can just be patient. I get really stressed when people interrupt me, but I can just be patient. I get really stressed when people interrupt me, but I can just be patient. And then you do the rest of this tapping by repeating that positive statement. I can just be patient. 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 So it's the top of the head, the eyebrows, the sides of the eyes, under the eye, under the nose, the chin, the collarbone, and under the arms. And you can do the under the arms this way, which is just easier for me to do this way. Kids like to do it this way because it looks like a monkey, especially if they're younger. Middle school, high schoolers are probably going to want to do it this way. And you just repeat that. I can just be patient. I can just be patient until you actually feel calm, until you kind of feel yourself return to that parasympathetic nervous system. For some people, it'll only take 2 or 3 times. If it's really, someone's really stressed, it might take a few more times to repeat that. There's, right now, not a real understanding from a neuroscience perspective about why that works, but I think it really has to do with rhythm and speaking to our survival brain that's very responsive to sensory experience and rhythm. And so I think that's part of the reason why that's helpful. But you're also engaging really with that saying, you're also engaging prefrontal cortex. I can just be patient and reminding yourself of that. So creating those connections. Then we have physical relaxation strategies. And yoga is one of, so you can find guided yoga routines online. Yoga by Adriene is really, really popular. She has lots of different routines that she uses. She has them for beginners, for advanced people. She has it for stress. She has it to go to sleep, reduce anxiety, lots of different things. She's easy to listen to, which is really, really important for me. And so some people may have different, kind of expectations auditorily, but you can find those things online. The really good thing about yoga and the reason that it works is because it allows you to stretch. So whatever position you're doing, whether it's, the warrior position or, there's all different downward dog position. It's all about stretching and using, different parts of your body and releasing those muscles. So you don't have to even know yoga, but if you just stretch, just turn your body, reach up, reach down, stand up, touch your toes, extend your legs, roll your shoulders, all of these things, roll your neck. All of these things are stretching your muscles and allowing that release of that tension that you've held in your body. You can also teach your kids how to use deep relaxation and teach your kids how to use deep relaxation, which is kind of most of the time it will start, you can either start head to toe. I like to do it the other way, toe to head, where you just will tense a body part and you hold it for a few seconds and then you immediately release. And again, that's going to activate the muscle and the tension, and then the release is going to be that kind of, again, releasing the tension that you hold there. So you might start with your toes and you curl your toes and hold it really, really tight, and then you release. And then you'll do your ankles and maybe you stretch them out, hold, and then release. Work your way up, tense the calves. A lot of times you'll see the feet go this way when you're tensing your calves, and then release. Tense your thighs. You can do this in a sitting position. Tense your thighs and release. Tense your buttocks. It's like, and kids think it's funny, especially elementary kids, if you say, act like you're holding in a fart. And then release. Tense your lower back, and you just work your way up where you tense and you release. And it's really important that release is immediate. It's not a slow release. It's an immediate release because it lets go and it lets the muscles just kind of, so you can tense your shoulders. Don't forget to do your face. Usually you do it by squinting, and as the adult, we are modeling this for our kids. So we're always doing it as well. It's helpful sometimes to dim the lights if you have enough staff to make sure that kids aren't going to do things they're not supposed to help them relax. They usually need to be in a really comfortable position. So either, if not reclining, then sitting where both feet are going to be on the floor, their shoulders are dropped, because that's going to be, really important for that deep relaxation. But it's just kind of, if they're really tense, notice where it is. So let's tense our body, and then we just kind of relax to be able to do that. This is a great thing to do right before you go to bed, because it allows your body to just kind of get rid of all of that excess energy and really just kind of follow it up by a deep sigh, deep breathing. Breathing is one of the best things that you can, deep breathing is one of the best things that you can do. Again, the key to kind of deep breathing is that your exhale is longer than your inhale. If you do this stuff, the deep breathing for 90 seconds, then that kind of resets the brain patterns. It's like, okay, so now we're good. We can return to sympathetic nervous system. Guided meditation is also something that you can do if you have kids. If a client who's very visual, then find, again, YouTube is wonderful to find numerous guided meditation. videos where they just walk you through. Sometimes you're on a beach, sometimes you're walking through the forest. It talks about, and usually guided meditation is going to engage all of the senses. So the one that I like to do is, and it's a female voice, talking about walking through the forest, and you can see the light, dapple through the leaves. You can hear the leaves rustle and the sound of the undergrowth as you're walking through. When you walk through, you can smell the leaves and the smell of the earth as you kick up the leaves. And it's just all of those types of sensory, experiences that are incorporated into guided meditation. And a lot of times it will also include deep breathing. Yoga, if you find a really, really good yoga routine, will also include a lot of deep breathing. And deep breathing is always abdominal breathing and not chest breathing. So sometimes, and this is the way that babies breathe. They don't breathe with usually their chest is not moving, it's their belly that's moving, because abdominal breathing is kind of the best breathing that we can do. And sometimes we have to reteach ourselves how to do that. So you put a hand on your chest, put a hand on your belly. And when you take a deep breath inside, it's the hand on your belly that's going out and not the hand. Usually there's not a lot of movement on the hand on your chest. If you're doing deep abdominal breathing, and then and then when you breathe out, the hand will move back toward your spine, back toward your belly button. Again, all of these things a lot of times are found for free online. And then we have emotion. So kind of just like emotion-focused strategies that will include things like social support. Sometimes we just have to get it out, and laughter. So one of the things that we know in neuroscience is that social support is extremely effective and very, very helpful, and almost acts as an immunization and a barrier or a buffer against negative adverse experiences. And when we think about, kids who have really, really difficult backgrounds, but they go on to be very successful, a lot of times when they're asked, how did you get through that hard time? We talk about, or even if it's just adults, we talk about that, that one person that was there for us. And good social support is correlated. There's lots of research that says that good social support helps our immune systems function better. We actually heal quicker. There's this is sometimes even medical support or medical research that supports this. They would have nurses actually touch their patients when they would take their temperatures, when they would do their blood pressure. And the more that they actually, it's appropriate positive touch, usually just shoulders, arms, those type of things, people heal faster. They spent less time in the hospital. It improves our mental health. It actually makes us live longer, because what's interesting is that these positive relationships and social support release a chemical called cortisol in the brain. And cortisol, positive support releases oxytocin. And oxytocin is our bonding neurotransmitter. It is our relational neurotransmitter. And it is released when mothers breastfeed. It's released when we climax with a partner. It's released if we are touched by a caring, positive, safe person. Sometimes even just hearing their voice or seeing their face is enough to release oxytocin. And oxytocin follows the same neural pathways as cortisol, which is the stress hormone. And oxytocin will always override cortisol. So if cortisol is there, and cortisol over a long period of time is really, really bad for the brain, but oxytocin will follow those same pathways and override cortisol and negate any of the negative impact that it could have. So relationships are probably one of the positive, caring relationships are one of the best things that we can give our kids. And maybe it's us, maybe it is an extended family member, maybe it's a coach or a teacher, but we need to kind of build that social support. And the best way to do that is by asking the kids, who makes you feel safe? Who do you know cares about you? And when they're really, really stressed out, when they're having a hard time making that person available for them, even if it's just by phone, over Zoom, whatever, but making that person available, because again, hearing the voice, seeing a face, it will release oxytocin. Oxytocin will turn off that stress response. It negates the negative damage that could be done by cortisol, and it is better for us. It's good for us mentally, it's good for us neurologically, it's good for us emotionally and physiologically. Sometimes we do just need to get it out. And so release is a good way. You have a person sometime, that you can just go to and just, I call it emotionally vomit. You just dump that, it's like, blah, blah, and you just vent, you rant, you rave. They don't have to say anything. They don't have to have solutions. Sometimes you just have to get it out. And they need to have safe people. Kids need to have safe places to be able to do that. You can do that through talking. You can also do that through writing. And so having a journal. And if it's like just really, really, stuff that they don't want anybody to know about, just writing it down. There's something about the act of writing it down and crumpling it up and throwing it away that makes us feel better. So again, this is supported by research, but it's putting it out into the world, getting it out of us in some way, whether it's verbal, whether it is, written, to put that out there. Sometimes we can do that through art. Sometimes we can do that through releasing or listening to music. And so there's research out there that shows that people who like heavy metal music, this is a form of release for them. So when they're stressed, listening to the hard driving music is a way to kind of release that and get it out, and let some of that go. And then I'm always a really strong component for laughter, because laughter is also correlated with a lot of these positive outcomes that we've talked about. Even if it's fake laughter, it's super interesting. Again, lots of really interesting research around fake laughter or fake smiling. We can trick our brains into thinking that it's not that bad, and it lowers the stress response. When we smile, even if it's a fake smile, the muscles in our face send messages to our brain that says, hey, this is not so bad. This is okay. We can handle this. Laughing is a release. Sometimes we have to cry too. Sometimes we just have to cry and get it out. That can be a release as well. But watching something that's funny, it's also a distracting mechanism. It's also a connecting, a social and emotional connecting strategy, laughing with somebody. There's some research that shows people who laugh more on the first date are more likely to have longer relationships. Just like super fascinating stuff. But find something, use humor to break the ice, use humor, to kind of deal with some negative situations or something that is going to cause conflict. When my boys were still at home, they had chores to do, and as teenagers will do, they complained about their chores. There was an article in the paper about a mom stabbing her 13-year-old because he didn't do the dishes. And I cut the article out, and then the boys would complain to me about the chores. And I'd say, go read the refrigerator. They knew what was on the refrigerator, and we'd all, oh, mom, whatever. But then they would stop complaining. They'd go do their chores. So, lots of different ways that we can use laughter to connect, to release that, kind of negative energy, to just distract ourselves from what's going on, and to make us feel better. All right. So you guys, as I mentioned before in the housekeeping items, you will have an opportunity to get all of these resources. So we have the ACEs. So these are a list of resources that I used as well. I do recommend this book here if you're really, really interested in learning more about the body and trauma's impact on the body. Childhood Disrupted is an excellent book. She has a lot of other strategies as well about things that we can do to heal due to trauma, if you have a trauma history or working with someone. I also recommend The Connected Child, or I don't have, there's another book, something discipline. I don't remember what it is. By Stuart Siegel is the author's name. And it's something discipline, brain aligned discipline, maybe. But those are really good books, again, about strategies for connecting with kids who have experienced trauma and heal. This last book, The Body Keeps the Score, I know that a lot of people in this field are very familiar with this book. A lot of science is kind of dense, but a great amount of information. If you guys want additional resources, again, I would suggest that I encourage you to reach out to me. I do want to remind everyone that there is an evaluation. So once this is over, you will be prompted to complete the evaluation. Once you complete that evaluation and turn it in, you will get a certificate of attendance. All of these documents, as well as documents from the other presentations, are going to be available to the participants at the end of this conference. And if you have any other questions, please feel free to reach out to me. Let me see if I have my information. Nope. rdonaldson@ndsb.org. I want to thank you for attending the 2021 IYSA Professional Development Retreat, Connecting with Your Inner Child. Hope that you enjoyed this, and we look forward to seeing you on other sessions. Thank you.